Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is the Analects. We're going to continue with the same format that we actually ended up using last week, where we went through a verse, made comments, and then went through the next verse. And so we're going verse by verse as opposed to reading a group of verses at the same time. We found that that was a little bit more efficient, and everybody seemed to have liked it. So we're excited here this evening. So let's get started. Now, Penny, would you mind reading verse 16, chapter 7?
The master said, with coarse rice to eat, with water to drink, and my bended arm for a pillow, I have still joy in the midst of these things. Riches and honors acquired by unrighteousness are to me as a floating cloud.
Thank you. James, would you mind reading your version, or if you have a different version?
Actually, I have two different versions.
Oh, great.
Sometimes I'm having a hard time deciding what is the lege. Yours says it's the lege, right?
Yeah, I believe Penny just read the lege version. Yes.
Okay, my lege is really different.
Is it?
So I don't know if I should read it or not.
Would you mind reading both?
Well, they're similar. I think the lege and the eno are similar. So I'll just give you the eno.
Okay.
The master said, to eat coarse greens, drink water, and crook one's elbow for a pillow. Joy also lies therein. Wealth and high rank obtained by unrighteous means are to me like floating clouds.
So would anybody else like to read their version of chapter 7, verse 16? If not, well, then we'll go right to Jason's version. Okay, we'll go right to Jason's.
16. Okay, so here's 16. I think that should be easy. So the master said, eating coarse food, drinking water, and sleeping on my bent arm as a pillow. There too are joys in them. Riches and honors without righteousness are to me like floating cloud. So this one, I think we can talk more on the 7:19, chapter 19, because a few of them combined together kind of become Confucius and Yan Hui's searching for happiness. Okay, so but basically this one is one of them. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to comment on verse 7:16? What they taken away from it, or does anybody have anything about their takeaways?
Well, I'm looking for the raise hand function. Sorry.
Okay, there you go.
Joseph, one of the things that comes to mind is that there seem to be almost two parts to 7:16.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if other people kind of felt that, and then that raises the question of what the relationship is between the two parts. It's almost as if they could stand on their own. I'm not sure about what Jason feels about that.
So what are you seeing in the two parts, Mark?
Well, it looks like the first part is suggesting pointing to some sort of simplicity in way of life. And the second part, wealth, I forget what Jason said, but wealth, and I think he said honor or
Yeah. Honor. Yeah.
That's
On-
right. That's correct.
and I think one of James's, not James, sorry. Yeah, it was James, right?
Mhm.
One
Yeah.
of his translations said high rank, which was a little more concrete. But
That was the other one.
ah,
That was the one from him. Yeah.
and so this seems to be
Okay.
concern me no more than floating clouds. It's like this is very transitory. But I guess the idea of floating clouds could be very pregnant with meaning depending on how Confucius uses that somewhere else. Because floating clouds might be very transitory, but they could also carry rain. So I don't know if it's a completely unambiguous metaphor, but it sounds like it's something pretty negative.
Well, there's a couple of things that I'll just make a quick comment on. From what I did read is that there is an element of scarcity and simplicity in the first part that's accurate here. But it's also, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Jason, this is associated with the ritual as well. So what I'm reading here, it's from on the morning of record of rights, explains people mourning the death of the Lord, including princes and great officials, and the Lord's widow should eat coarse rice and drink plain water for a period of time. That's one of the things that I had come across when reading about this particular passage. So it does get to this idea of basic necessity, but there's also a ritualistic aspect that we
Let me make a comment on this. At least personally, I reject the comment on ritual. I don't see
Okay.
it as anything ritual. Basic simplicity. I think that's on the personally I will totally reject. Okay, if anybody comment say this one is about ritual, so I will say no.
Okay.
And the second thing, I already changed my translation from honor to high ranking. I think that makes sense because the word 贵 means expensive. Okay, and then I think honor something about in English words is more on the good deed or something. So something like I did something honorable. So I think high ranking or your social ranking probably make more sense. And also reflect the metaphor of the floating cloud is high, but it's not belong to me. I think that's the meaning. When Confucius say like a floating cloud, that means something probably good, but not belong to me. I think that's what he meant.
So the translation that I have does use honor as well.
Yeah, then when Mark talk about this, I think the high ranking probably makes more sense, at least by my understanding of the English word honor.
Okay. Quan, I can read a little bit more about what I've come across in my readings, but
yeah, maybe Jason, I want to say it before I forget. If you put an S to honors with an S would be equivalent to high ranking, and there would be no confusion. But high ranking is very good, of course.
Okay, yeah, I did put an S. Yes.
Oh, you did put an S. Okay.
Yeah, I have an S.
So if you put an S, it's debatable. I mean, honors, you have many scales of honor. It could be high, but with high ranking, there's no doubt. That's for sure.
so
Anyway.
Does anybody wish to comment on the floating clouds specifically? Because again, wealth. I'll just read a line of the second half of my translation is wealth and honor acquired through uprightness are to me like floating clouds. Uh, and in the comments that I have here, it's floating clouds drift in the sky, so they have no use for people, even though people look up at them. Thus, they are insufficient for people's minds.
Yeah.
That it brings some context to it, but anyway, go ahead, Quan.
No, you're absolutely right, because floating clouds here means something which doesn't have a strong foundation. Okay, something rooted in your heart and your mind. And I want to come back to the excellent comment in my mind that there is two big subjects in those 5 lines. That's true that the first part, I think that it gives the two big ideals of the Confucian scholars. Okay, when simplicity is put forward, it's the ideal of the scholar uh, devoted to studies, to science, to literature, to poetry, and he would not mind having a very simple life in terms of riches and of wealth. And the second part is more the ideal of the Confucian scholar going, participating in government, but if he obtains wealth and high rank because he's competent and devoted to the state, it's only a natural consequences of his services. But if he get those things by underhanded maneuvers,
Right.
it would be something not commendable and not approved at all. So I think that the person at the beginning, having said that there's two things, I think is very right. And it reminds a little bit of what in Chinese is called the 对联, meaning parallel sentences, but on the same subject. Okay, on one side, you have the ideal of the frugal scholar. On the other side, you have the ideal of the government official, and you can become rich and powerful by being a good government official. But if you become rich and powerful by being a flatterer or a sycophant, it would be less shining, of course. So, and it's truly I would say that one of the very important paragraph, because that's the two big destinies for all Confucian scholars. And some of them will go through those two phases or those two destinies, depending of what is happening in their life. Okay, because you can be disgraced, for example, when you participate in court affair.
Right.
And when you're disgraced, well, you can go home and write some interesting book, so you will fulfill the two dimensions of a scholarly life as defined by traditional China.
Excellent comments. I really like how you broke that down between the two. Again, the ideal Confucian scholar being, but I don't want to keep coming back and break to this. I don't want to spend too much time on this early. You know what? Let me come to Will and Mark, and then I'll make a comment.
Hi. I think about one of the earlier chapters where one of his students says, poor but not flattering. And then, how do you like that, Confucius? And Confucius says, I prefer poor but joyful. And I just wonder what his, the interesting thing about studying the Analects is trying to find a topic and then connecting it to wherever you see that topic mentioned. And I don't know what his view on joy is, but it's it seemed like his idea of a good person, or a junza maybe, is somebody, part of that is being joyful under without much. And and also I think there's another chapter where Yan Hui is praised for being joyful even though he's very poor. That's what came to me. Thank you.
Great comments. I appreciate that, Will. And I do agree with you that I like to make those connections as well. Jason, what does he mean by joy? I mean,
Okay, I think in the chapter 19, we will have time to talk about this
okay,
one.
okay.
This one become a very important concept, so-called in the Song Dynasty, the Neo-Confucius movement, the Chen brothers, and they focus so-called searching for happiness by Confucius and Yan Hui. Okay, so that's become an important subject about actually Confucius is not just, serious thing. It's so.
Yeah. If I may interrupt, I
Please.
think that the way that he has been written, we can make some hypotheses, okay? Because the master said to eat coarse greens, drink water, and crook one's elbow for a pillow. Joy also lies therein. Okay, so the description insists on the fact that that person is not very rich, okay, and even poor.
Right.
So the joy here, of course, is the joy not coming from those poor objects, of course, but is your joy coming from outside, from wealth, power, relations, or is your joy is coming from inside? So you have here your capacity to enjoy the simple things of life, but that capacity to enjoy the simple things of life doesn't come essentially from the objects, as you would admire a beautiful piece of art, or you have beautiful furniture, or you have beautiful garments or fancy food and so on, but would be from the power of your inner spiritual life that would make you appreciate the simple things of life.
Freedom comes from internally versus externally, and I think that that's that's an important theme, and that you kind of see throughout the Analects. Thanks. We'll go to Mark, and then we're going to move on. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Joseph.
Sure.
I just raised my hand when I heard you read out your translation a few minutes ago.
Sure.
Because it sounded like you were not saying the word wealth and eminence improperly, but it sounded like you said properly. And I just wanted to clarify.
Wealth and honor acquired through unrightness.
Oh, unrightness. Okay.
Yes.
I just missed that.
Yeah.
But it's great listening to everyone. And I just wanted to respond to what Quan was just suggesting about the internal versus the external. There's almost something else here in the having your bent arm as a pillow suggests self-sufficiency as well, perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to take 5 seconds, okay?
Sure.
Self-sufficiency, absolutely, I agree with that, in the sense that don't burden yourself with too much objects on a very down-to-earth level.
Okay.
Okay. Well, do you want to make a quick comment? Go ahead, Jason.
No, I have a quick question to the group.
Sure.
I don't know, in the Western culture, does people sleep in this way? Because when I was a kid, my grandpa said, I'm going to sleep. He was just like this. So I'm not sure it's a cultural thing or it's a common thing. Does you guys sleep doing this one considered sleeping? My grandpa doing this means he's going to sleep.
It could be personal. It could be personal, and it's possible that older people actually do assume different postures when they go to bed than younger people. I've seen information that states that the average person tosses and turns quite a bit unknown to them when they're sleeping. So so the actual postures that one uses probably do change with age. I've noticed that in myself. I could sleep in a lot of different positions when I was fall asleep in a lot of different positions when I was young, and now I have a preferred position to go to sleep.
So thank you. All right, we're going to move on to 7:17 because that was 20 minutes.
It was.
Yeah, so that's why it's just keep us moving. Just only because to Will's point a little bit earlier, a lot of these verses are related to one another. So we're going to come back to these topics. So it's not as if we're going to leave this, skip this topic and not come back to it. I may have said uprightness by mistake there, Mark. Forgive me if I did, but it was unrightness. I'm not sure, or if you misheard, or if I misspoke. But either way, we're going on to 7:18. Penny, would you mind reading?
7:18 or 7:17?
Oh, 7:17. I'm sorry.
Okay, 7:17. The master said, if some years were added to my life, I would give 50 to the study of the Yi, and then I might come to be without great faults.
Okay, and
Jim.
mine is, thank you. Mine is, the master said, give me a few years till 50 in order to learn. And indeed, I may be free of great flaws.
Thank you, James.
Excuse me, James, does your version talk about Book of Change or I Ching or no? Or just study?
Richard Eno uses a footnote to discuss the controversy about the I Ching.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he leaves out the word in the translation.
Okay.
It's left out of my translation, but it's also covered in mine as well. As it's talked about after the age of 50 for the I Ching. But go ahead, Jason, why don't you go ahead and share your version? The mandate from heaven that you get.
So, okay, so I think it's probably you guys are study hard, so better than most of the people, I think. So I think first, there's a few things that doesn't make sense, right? Most of the translation is talking about give me a few years. When I turn 50, I can study Book of Change, E, right? And then I have no without great faults. But question is this: Confucius, for sure, he's over 50 during this time. And if he was 30, 40, that makes sense. But he must older than 50. So 50, I think some scholar will consider not 50 years old, because Chinese say 50 is say 5, 10, right? So it could be add several years, 5 or 10 years, and then I can do something. So for an old people, like almost 70, he wish he has another 5, 10 years. I think that would be reasonable. So that's number one. Number two, if you see the screen, this word means Yi, which is a book of change or called I Ching, right? One way to read it is, if I could, Master said, if I could add several years to my life and spend 5 or 10 years to learn the book of changes, I may be without great faults. That's one way to read it, because some people will assume Confucius is big fan of Book of Change, and then he want to spend more time to study Book of Change, and he expect has no great faults. But another way to read it is, because the Chinese has no punctuation, so if you move this word to the second phrase, and this one, E, could be the same as this one, E, different writing, but in the state of Lu, this E probably means this E, that means also. Okay, so if we read it this way, that become the master said, if I could add several years to my life and spend 5 or 10 years to learn, okay, and I may be without great fault. So I personally probably would prefer the second version because I don't see Confucius really a big fan of Book of Change or I Ching, unlike most of the people will consider Confucius is big fan of I Ching. Because I think if he really like think I Ching or Book of Change is so important, he will quote many times. But unfortunately, in these 20 books, he only quote once. I think in the later chapter because he want to explain the perseverance. Okay, so he quote I Ching. That's the only time. Unlike the book of document or the book of oath, he quote many times. So in this point of view, he could not mean, book of change. He could not mean just add a few more years to learn, and I have no big mistake. But of course, I think most of the people will read it as book of change because I think most of the people believe Confucius like book of change or consider book of change is very important.
Thank you for that, Jason. Does anybody else have any comments regarding 17, verse 17? No?
Yep.
I'll raise a question, I guess.
Please, go ahead.
The last phrase, I'm looking at this Sonderling, I think it is, but
What translation are you looking at?
Sonderling. I'm forgetting his name and I can't scroll back, but and in Jason's as well, which I did see on the screen for a moment.
Sure.
Where he says, I would be free of great faults, or I would be free of major faults. I think, does that mean that we should acknowledge that he cannot ever be free of all faults, and that his ideal
Sagehood
also is in a sense practical? It's not perfection, if that's not possible.
James, I mean, I would say that it is much more practical, and that it's not necessarily the sage in the sense of the way we would think of it in the sense of the Bhagavad Gita or the Greek sage. Jason, I see you smiling.
Yeah, I would say I don't think Confucius and never expect himself is perfect, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so and does he admit he made mistake? Yes, he did. Okay, so I think in the later chapter he talked about this.
Yeah, he does. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I think the idea of perfectionism comes to mind. So I was raised in that philosophy, by the way, by my mother. So I was taught to be a perfectionist, and of course it rubbed me the wrong way. When I got to be a teenager and I had to reinvent myself, I had to question that my upbringing in a lot of ways. But that was kind of the that I think that could be said to be a theme that is present here. Is there is a possibility of perfectionism, not in not in terms of like nitty causes and things like that, but in terms of like eliminating the major flaws in one's practice and one's character.
So if there are no other comments about verse 17, again, in my notes, I've actually quite a few notes on this particular verse, all the way up to, I even found some information where Carl Jung really focuses on the I Ching about this in his uh, and how it's a way of obtaining spiritual wisdom. Uh, but specifically, just that Confucius understood the mandate of heaven at age 50, and he read the book of understanding the mandate of heaven at the age when one can understand the mandate of heaven, so he would have no major faults. That's the notes that I've taken down. So I don't know if but if not, if there aren't any other additional comments, then we can move on to 7:18 this time.
Yeah, I'd like to add on. I think your explanation part is the consensus or majority interpretation. Confucius said he also said at the 50, right? He know the mandate of heaven, and then in this one he said, I will learn a book of change, I Ching, at the age of 50. Then I will have no mistake, no major
faults.
Yeah, major fault, because I know mandate of heaven. Yeah, I think that's the match perfectly. But if you put the historical background, and it's a little bit odd, because he must older than 50. He cannot be younger than 50 during that time. And why he talk about 50 at this moment? I think that's a big question, if you want to ask.
Quan.
Yes, I would like to say that Confucius has at least three faces. And I think that maybe you know that there are three interpretations of the Chun Chu, which is a historical book corresponding to the Chronicles of the Principality of Lu. And in the one of the interpretation, the Zuo Chuan, he's presented as someone having a rational perspective. That's one Confucius, and I say that because it can be generalized to everything. Okay, you can see him as a teacher, as a rational man, and not too interested by metaphysical considerations. That's one possibility. Another possibility, which corresponds to the Kongyang interpretation of the Chun Chu, and once again, it can be generalized to everything and not only to the Chun Chu. He's perceived as the philosopher king, bringing a certain metaphysical interpretation of the world and suggesting a kind of Confucian manifesto, okay, having universal, timeless, cosmic consequences. So it would be a Confucius that would be that would have a bigger metaphysical representation. And the last one, the Guliang tradition, also on the Chun Chu, but once again, it can be generalized to everything. It's a Confucius which is more ritualistic, more obsessed by the details in family interactions and in social interactions. So I would say that if I may make the rapprochement, as with Jesus, you have many Jesuses for the traditions with an S, as you have many Confuciuses, a down-to-earth one or a very metaphysical one. And you can give as many interpretations as you want, depending of your proclivity.
I don't want to spend too much time on that, but that's actually almost a meetup onto itself. It really is. I mean, you know, what you just explained there, the different manifestations of
Yeah.
Confucius, one from a metaphysical perspective, but one from the human. I had personally, what I have come to see in this, in reading the Analects, is the ritualistic aspect of Confucius. That's what I have taken away from, not as much the metaphysical. That's again, but this, I'm by no means a Confucian expert, but I think that that's and everything that I've read. But the metaphysics of Confucius is something that I haven't explored, and it seems like actually maybe that's maybe a topic for the Asian philosophies group to bring up at some point.
Well, actually, I've been talking about last week and the following few weeks probably were about this, because in the Song Dynasty, they try to build the metaphysical foundation for the Confucian school. You know.
Okay. Well, then we'll answer that question.
And Joseph, your mention of the ancient philosophers, I don't know if you were referring to the Greeks, but Quan mentioned the philosopher king as an ideal. And
Right.
one of the earlier readings of this verse that interpreted it as being 50 years old reminded me of Plato's
Philosopher king.
that only can begin studying philosophy at the age of 50. Because in the Republic, the young do not study philosophy per se.
Was it the
Yeah.
same? Was it age 50? I thought it was age 40, but it doesn't matter. But I just out of curiosity.
No, I think he said 50 years
So they
old.
both were at 50? They were both at 50?
Yeah, 50,
Yes. Yes.
50,
Wow.
but 50, but I think it's a 50 you can be qualified for the philosopher king, become the
Yes.
guardian.
Exact. I would like to remind that in 2.6 of the Analects, at 40, he said that at 40, I am no more confused. Okay. And at 50, I am capable to hear the will of heaven. So if you take the metaphysical interpretation of Confucius, it's the beginning of the training to be a philosopher king.
And Quan, I was going to mention that passage before. Is that the passage where he ends up saying, at 70, I was able to listen to the dictates of my own heart?
Absolutely. It's 2.6.
Uh,
And it
and
start, sorry.
It's just that's what made me think originally about, even at 70 and even having studied and learned, whether it's the I Ching or something else, he doesn't ever expect to be perfect. Even if he's listening to the dictates of his own heart, that doesn't guarantee a kind of perfection, I suppose, in morality and ritual and so on.
No, because as you said, at 70, he said that I'm capable to follow my heart's desire and all the same obey to the universal laws. It means that there is a deepening of your metaphysical understanding. And when you reach 70 in true chronological age or in symbolic age, it means that the depth of your understanding is such that your desire is equal to the will of heaven. That you cannot desire bad things because your heart is in vibration with the laws of heaven. And I don't know if you read the Gongyang interpretation of the Chun Chu, but if you read it, the vocabulary is exactly than the Platonician vocabulary. Okay, the philosopher king, the laws of heaven, etc., etc. And I agree with the Joe. The Analects is a much more down to earth Confucius.
Sorry, everybody. I have actually, yeah, we're dealing with some bombers. So
Okay.
as people are trying to come in, so we're
Okay, the guy with the rap music, it's still him.
yeah. But I had accidentally, I think James, I might have
You
I might have
removed the wrong one.
I removed the wrong one. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, because I
And
know James
I
Peck.
know James too. I know James too, and I'm going to have to email him an apology.
Yeah, public.
So that was unfortunate.
That always happens.
Yeah. Wow. But I know Darren was definitely a bomber.
Okay, let's
So
remove him.
yeah.
Well, we don't all have to be completely free of great flaws, Joseph.
Thank you for that. Well,
Yeah.
I'm still not 50, so
Oh, good.
so some, but yeah, I do feel very guilty about that. I do owe an apology. So let's go ahead and move on to 718, and actually we're moving along fairly good pace.
All right. 718. The master's frequent themes of discourse were the odes, the history, and the maintenance of the rules of propriety. On all these, he frequently discoursed.
Okay, mine
Thank
is,
you.
all right,
Thank you,
sorry.
Penny. Thank you, Penny. Go ahead, James. I'm sorry.
Yeah, mine is a little bit different.
So is mine.
Those things for which the master always employed court dialect, the poetry, the documents, the conduct of Li. For all these, he employed court dialect. And there is a footnote which is interesting. Classical China was a patchwork of regions speaking different languages and dialects. Confucius likely spent his childhood in a region south of Lu that spoke a local language or dialect distinct from Zhou norms.
Thank you for that, James. Jason, do you want to go ahead and share yours?
Yeah, I think we already see the difference here. So I just offer my translation. The master usually use the court language for the book of oaths, the book of documents, and in performing the rituals, they were all in the court language. So just like some translation will say that's the kind of lingua franca language or the proper language. And another reading, I think most of Chinese, well, I should not say most, but I don't know. But I see a lot of translation will consider as a teaching. Confucius said the book of oath, the book of document, and the language used in rituals are proper language. That's the good language you need to learn. The good words you need to learn. So that really depends on this word, ya yan. Okay, how are you going to interpret, right? If you interpret ya yan as a standard court language, that's one way to read it. Or you read ya yan as a proper language. So this one become a teaching. You need to learn the good words from the book of oath, book of document, and ritual when you performing ritual. So that's a two-way of learning. But I probably will prefer reading this one as a standard tone or the proper, not proper language, the court language. Yeah. And another thing is I will consider this one as another proof. Confucius may not consider Book of Change is that important. Otherwise, he will say include the Book of Change in this statement, but he didn't. So, yeah.
That's interesting. Would anybody like to share their thoughts on 718? Or have any initial comments?
This
Yeah,
this
maybe I have.
exists. I'm sorry.
No.
This exists in some other cultures, like you know, there is even there's a standard accent in the United States, for example. I think it's called standard American or something like that. It's a variety of language that's spoken in cities like New York City and Washington, D.C. and so forth. That there were certain regions of the East. Um, and but I think yeah, there have been lots of places where the language kind of evolved regionally, and then the proper way of speaking might have just been concentrated in the capital, for example. So I think this is a general tendency with language, but China is perhaps the best case because China has always been an extended geographically. So we can look for large differences, I think, there. And of course, the Russian, I mean, what was it called? The Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was probably also a good case where they spread their language around. But what happened as a result is you get all these other Latin languages like Portuguese, Spanish, and even German was probably influenced by Latin. So a lot of these other dialects would emerge, or half languages, would kind of like emerge out of the influences of the dominant lingua franca.
Thank you for that, James. Will.
One thing I noticed in several places and definitely here is it just he's just seems very conservative, like in his, I don't mean that like in today's terms necessarily, but
Right.
sort of in the sense that his ideology is looking to the past for what was done well and trying to and it's also very like, and especially in the last verse or last chapter, he's not a person that sees himself as like some sort of like divine messenger. He's just a person who studies the past and thinks that you don't change it without a good reason. And he also has a very idealized conception of the Zhou dynasty. Also, I just wanted to say this book, which is hard to find, by H.G. Creel, is a very exciting biography of Confucius. And it's written probably 70 years ago, but it is, it presents him as a person who is just very humble. And I think these verses support that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that there has to be a degree of humility because of the amount of respect that he shows to the past continuously, whether it's through ritual. I mean, even the way of honoring your mother and father, it's more about honoring who they were. It's honoring the past, what they were. It's not necessarily just, sorry, we got potential other more potential bombers. But anyway, no, I agree with you. There's a certain humility when you're willing to look to the past for guidance and not necessarily do away with the rituals without very good reason. And that requires a certain amount of humility in the sense that you're saying that somebody has already done this or figured this out. And anyway, sometimes you see people that come in and they just want to change the way things are just without any kind of reason sometimes, just because it's different. Thanks, Will. Great comments. Quan.
Okay, I have two comments. First, let's not forget that Confucius was a teacher, and his role as a teacher is to prepare young nobles to appear in public in court.
Mm.
So, in order to appear in public properly, they had to know a certain number of poetries in the book of poetry of songs precisely with the proper pronunciation. Okay, and when they have diplomatic encounters, they need to know those poems. Most of the time, it's about the Zhou dynasty precisely. And there are some poems that you need to use in certain diplomatic circumstances. And if you don't know them, you don't do your job properly as an aristocrat of that time. So maybe that paragraph is simply describing his job as a teacher for young noblemen in their preparation to be how can I say it, to be a proper aristocrat in the social environment of that time. That's my first comment. My second comment is about the languages. It's not only in ancient China, even it's the case to nowadays, because you have about, I don't know the exact number, but maybe around 300 dialects in China. Okay, and the Putonghua, the national language, is the mother tongue of maybe 500 million Chinese. So it's about 1/3 of China that of Chinese people having the Putonghua as their mother tongue. But all the Chinese learn Putonghua in school. So they are capable to talk the national language since they go to school, but it's not the mother tongue of 2/3 of the Chinese.
Excellent comments. And that is true. If you think about Confucius's role as a teacher, that you would absolutely need to know these to be able to speak poetry. So that actually makes, and yes, if you're preparing people for high government positions, that they would absolutely need to know both poetry and I forget what the other was, and executive rituals is what I have listed under mine. So thank you for that, Quan. I think that clears up a lot for me. Penny, followed by James, and then Will.
Okay. Guan said basically very nicely what I was going to say. What I was just saying was thinking even in English, you know, we have proper English,
Right.
and we have slang. And if you're like at the university or working in the government in an office, you are supposed to speak proper English. You're not supposed to speak slang. So I think it's a little similar to that. And then I felt like the Book of Odes, the Book of Documents, and Li were like fundamental parts of being a Junzi, of learning what you were supposed to as a gentleman. And since these are so fundamental, then they should always be discussed, you know, in the highest language possible, which would be the court language.
Thank you, Penny. Great comments. James.
Yeah, that was an interesting that was an interesting comment. Somebody has a, something on
Yeah, I
their
think it was James.
sound. No, well, it wasn't me.
No, it was
James, but-
no, James Peck.
Oh, okay, thank you. Anyway, yeah, so what I noticed about this one is that it's third person. It's like just simply that this is what the master always employed court dialect. So it's kind of so I see this as a kind of like a personal rule. When you're doing poetry, when you're reading the documents, when you're practicing Lee, always use the court dialect. And if you're not doing that, of course, you don't have to. So you just simply speak to people in a personal way and in the dialect that they're used to being addressed, their own dialect, I would assume. So this is kind of like a rule that I think a lot of people, intellectuals today, would practice. You know, there's a time for speaking in a strictly official tone of voice, or a lecturer tone of voice, or something like that. But then there's a informal standard as well. So that's what I see when I hear this analect, that Confucius understood that there's a time and place for correct speech, and that doesn't have to be followed uniformly. We don't all aspire to using always using the stentorian voice, using the official dialect in all of our social dealings. So there's also a family dialect. There's a dialect that you use with friends, and so on and so forth.
Excellent comments. I agree completely. Is that there's a the way to speak. Sometimes if you were even in front of the Supreme Court today or something, it would be, and how you would speak, at a, I don't know, in any other circumstance in your law firm per se, it would be slightly different. So yeah, understanding the proper rules and proper rituals and approaches to how and how to speak and where to speak, and time and place for everything. No, that makes the most sense to me. So thanks, James. Will, followed by Mark, and then we're going to move on to 719.
I would just like to say, I wish I could find it in here where the author says it, but he believes that Confucius's view of the era that he idolized so much is a little bit of a mythology, and that it wasn't quite as perfect as Confucius imagines it to be. And if that's the case, it's kind of interesting to, the way we sometimes idolize our founding fathers, and
Sure.
in reality they were very imperfect, but there is a utility to idolizing their good parts, in terms of keeping up, the good things that they had in mind. And there's I don't know, it just made me think of that. And but it may have been it may have not has been quite as pretty a picture as Confucius paints it. I don't know.
That's an interesting question. It's an important question, how we idealize the past. Sometimes, the past we obviously can learn a great deal from, but yes, there's a bit of nostalgia sometimes that exists. Even if you're going through this process of mourning, where you're honoring your parents, where your parents really good people. I mean, that's an interesting. Your mom, you may be mourning somebody for 3 years that maybe ethically wasn't necessarily the best person in the world. There is that element of it. That being said, I would think that Confucius would probably take steps to, you know, to reflect reality as quick, you know, as close to, or capture reality as close as possible. If as a philosopher, but yes, I think we all have a tendency to idealize the past to some degree. Mark, followed by Quan.
Thanks, Joseph. I wanted to respond to Will's first comment about to what extent Confucius is conservative in this verse, and also what you said about the idealizing of the past and how we probably always do that.
Mhm.
But in a sense, his using of the ancient language or the ancient dialects, or however we want to refer to them, is the recreation of the past, and it's the perpetuation of the past, the continuation of the past into the present, and that itself is a kind of ritual. The ritual by way of which you keep the past present. Those are my thoughts on it.
Okay, thank you. Do you see a problem with that? Let me ask. Are you stating that is problematic or not?
No, I
Okay.
don't. I think it's part of, if it's part of his program, it's like a living part. It's a part by which the past can continue to infuse us, and it's part of it. I know it says here when he's reciting the odes or from the history,
Mm-hmm.
and when conducting ritual, but I guess I'm seeing it as when you're doing any of those things, you're always doing a ritual.
Okay.
When you're studying the ancient odes and you're reciting them in the language, that itself is a ritual.
Sure. Thank you. Quan?
Yes, I have a short comment, and I would like to say something about what Mark just said.
Sure.
Between the idealization and the real history, I would like to name one Chinese historian, a contemporary Chinese historian named Li Feng, Lifeng, and that Li Feng is a specialist of the Zhou dynasty. And because since the last 50 years, they discover a lot of inscribed bronze vessels, which give a much more solid foundations from the original documents on bronze of that period, which made the history of the Zhou dynasty advance tremendously. So I just want to mention Li Feng. That's my first thing. The second thing is about the fact that there's a French writer named Victor Segalen, Segalen. When he went to visit the Pacific people in the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, he noted that those people began to die as collectivities. And why? Because they were no more capable to name the names of their ancestors and of their oral literature. And it goes back a little bit to the comment by Mark. The fact that you quote the ancient poetry, or you try to do it with the proper own pronunciation, participate to the renewal of your civilization, okay? Because here we are in the domain of classical education. Classical education is not necessarily to transmit the history in a precise manner like the manner of a scientific historians nowadays, even if we can debate if history is truly a science. But in the sense of mythology precisely, and mythology for me is not a dirty word. Mythology is absolute storytelling. Okay, what what Victor Segalen said about the Pacific people who died because they were no more capable to name the names of their ancestors is precisely that. That's the classical transmission of a civilization, and that's the noble dimension of cultural transmission or of mythology, if you want.
Thank you, Quan. Great comments, and I appreciate you adding that. So shall we move to 719? Penny, would you mind?
Yes. The Duke of Shi asked Zilu about Confucius, and Zilu did not answer him. The master said, "Why did you not say to him, he is simply a man who in his eager pursuit of knowledge forgets his food, who in the joy of its attainment forgets his sorrows, and who does not perceive that old age is coming on."
Thank you, Penny. James.
Okay, 7.19.
Yeah.
The Lord of Shi asked Zilu about Confucius. Zilu could think of no response. The master said, "Why did you not say, as a man, when agitated in thought, he forgets to eat, joyfully forgetting his cares, not realizing that old age is at hand?"
Jason.
Okay. We are on 8:19. The Duke of Shi asked Zilu about Confucius. Zilu didn't answer him. The master said, of course, Confucius knew that. So he said, "Why didn't you say that? He is a man who forgets to eat when making an effort to learn, who forgets his sorrow when enjoying learning, and who is unaware that his old age is coming." So I think the original text doesn't say learning, but I just insert learning. Okay, basically just say make an effort and enjoy, and then okay. So I just assume he is talking about learning because with the other text. So that's a little bit not truly faithful to the text. Okay. Another thing is about the word most people pronounce as "she," but actually it should be "sir" because the place called "sir." And then if you pay attention, it could be called Duke, because during that time, Zhou is called king, right? And there's two other states, the head of state called king. One is Chu, one is Wu. Okay, actually you should consider that's three kingdoms. And then, so Shi is the state under Chu. That's why the head called Duke. Okay, so that's a small thing I like to mention. And then the important message here is connect with other texts I just listed. Basically, it's like book 7, chapter 16. And chapter 12, okay, they all can talk about the joy, okay, and then that's I think we already have enough discussion about the Confucius joy, right? It's inward, and the basis is not depend on outside. It's through your own heart, and you have joy. So I think that's become important message in this chapter. And the most important, we should not, we will see for sure next year. Okay, it's book 11. That's most important is to show Confucius' joy. And when he with a few his students, one of the students is Zheng Dian, who is Zheng Shen's father. Okay, very old student. Okay, so they all together, and that's really reflect the scene. So during that time, we can talk about this concept of the joy.
Has he been introduced yet,
I
Jason?
mean,
Has he been introduced yet?
Zheng Shen has been introduced many times, right? Zheng Shen. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he talked about the 慎终追远. You have to respect the pay respect to the death and memorize your own ancestor. I didn't.
Okay.
And in the next book, that probably half of chapter are the Mr. Zheng said. That's Zheng Shen. Okay. So and he also talk. If you just remind you, one is Confucius says, "My Dao." Okay, is one string through. Okay, and then people ask the disciple ask Zheng Shen, what does Confucius mean? Zheng Shen say, oh, it's only talk about loyalty and forgiven. Okay, so and Confucius left, something like this. So he is the very young student, and he is not so smart. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But his father, also Confucius' disciple or father. Okay. So they are together. So his father is the one Confucius really respect. Okay.
I see. Okay. Now I recall.
Then book 8 will have a lot Zheng Shen talk, because I don't know how much, but the major most of part of Analect is compiled by Zheng Shen's student. So he has been considered, that's why he called Mr. Zheng or Master Zheng.
Okay. James.
Okay, on this particular one, I think is interesting to me because it describes a kind of a remonstrance, but it's also the theme of how should someone remember me? In other words, I wasn't remembered in this case. Nobody spoke, and he says, "Why did you not say?" So Confucius said that. So this is kind of like it's like how would we like to be remembered? In this case, Confucius says, I want to be, why didn't you say, I'm somebody who becomes so concerned about things, agitated in thought, that I forget to eat. I forget about my cares, but joyfully, I joyfully forget my concerns and don't even pay attention to the fact that I am getting older. You know, and what comes when you get older? Sickness and death, you know, obviously. So there's lots of reasons to be concerned about things like that, but just to be joyful about studies and so interested in learning that you forget, or so interested in thought, pure thought, that you don't even you might even forget to eat. That is how he wants to be remembered to this head of state, this duke. So this I think this is something that could concern a lot of people. How do we want to be remembered by others?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's exactly what I had actually taken away from this, is that, you know, that Confucius is then thinking about his legacy in this particular instance, and the importance of legacy. But the other interesting thing is that I was surprised by Zai Lu's response still, that there was no response at all. But we'll go to
let me make a quick comment on this one.
yeah, sure.
Zilu is the person of action, so he probably not good in a speech. Okay, so Zilu is the person who died in a stake way. So this one shows Zilu is not good in the speech. And instead of consider this one is Confucius legacy, I think about different way. I kind of think about this one is a so-called elevator speech, right? So you want to introduce yourself quickly, then somebody met you, just first met, and say, okay, Joe, tell me about yourself. And most of the people it's difficult to answer this question. And the Confucius, this one said, the description. I consider instead of legacy, I consider as his elevator speech.
Wasn't prepared. Quan, followed by Will.
Okay, so I would like to bring a historical context to this because the Lord of Shi was a feudal lord of a small domain under the governance of the king of Chu, which is the big southern kingdom. By the way, in the Chinese world of that time, only the Zhou king had the title of king, except for the king of Chu, which is the southern kingdom, who was a little bit outside of the classical Chinese world. Okay, so he was the only warlord with the same title than the Zhou king, because in the Zhou system, he only has the title of Viscount. And of course, his ancestors were not very happy with that title of Viscount. So he decided to declare himself king. I think it was in 714 BCE, so about 2 centuries before Confucius' birth. The other thing is that Lord of Shi, Confucius met him when the king Chao of Chu just died. Okay, and Confucius put a lot of hope on that King Chao of Chu because it was at the end of his 14 years long exile, and he received some proposals from a high counselor of that King Chao of Chu. So he went there with his heart full of hopes that he would be capable to put into action his philosophy of governance. But destiny was not in his side because that King Chao just died, and he was at the residence of the Duke of the Lord of Shi in a provisional manner before going back to Wei, where he has his house with the Zulu brother-in-law. So it was a bit a moment of collapse of his political hopes. Okay, so and I would say that it kind of stressed the value of his answer, putting values on the fact that he just precisely center more on his inner joy rather than in the realization of his political ambitions, which just collapsed, as I said.
Thank you for that context. I mean, so Will.
Okay, here's my take with an enormous amount of speculation that is quite possibly very off. So he's going here with Confucius is going to this place with enormous expectations of getting a position to finally implement his ideas about how a society should be. And his student is asked by someone important about his qualifications, and his student, who's not a good speaker, just blows it and says nothing. And Confucius's hopes are dashed. And instead of doing something which is saying, like, throwing a fit and saying, you could have told him how ultimately qualified I am, he just uses this moment to give a nice little lesson about himself in other respects, but is maybe very disappointed at not getting a position there, possibly because of his own students' sort of
Inability to communicate.
right. Maybe, I don't know. That's the way I was picturing it in my head as I read it. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Will. But I think in a different way, based on Kwang provide very detailed background. I think Confucius is not complain or not because Zilu's inability to promote his teacher. I think it's more on the Confucius kind of feel like he knew, he's not going to get employed. Doesn't matter what Zilu answers. Okay, probably he already been rejected. Okay, and then Sir Gong, okay, the Duke of Sir asked him, right? How about you? Tell me about your teacher, since he had been fired or been rejected. And then Zilu didn't say anything. So Confucius is just kind of, knowing he has been rejected for the position, and then talk about this. And that probably were more fit to Confucius' situation. Just speculation.
So if there are no other comments, it's 10:30. I want to keep on pace and move on to 7:20. Thank you, Quan, for giving us context on that. That was very helpful.
It's always my pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, 7:20. The master said, I am not one who was born in the possession of knowledge. I am one who is found of antiquity and earnest in seeking it there.
Thank you, Penny. James.
Okay, the master said, I was not born with knowledge. I love what is old and am assiduous in pursuing it.
I'm going to read mine. The master said, I am not one who had knowledge at birth, but one who loves antiquity and promptly seeks it. So go ahead, you can share, Jason.
Okay, 20. The master say, I'm not born with knowledge. I love ancient teaching and keenly pursue them. So I love ancient teaching and Haogu. I think you go back to the chapter 1 in book 7, right? Talk about I believe and love ancient teaching. He is not a creator. He just transmitter. So that's what he meant. And the second thing he talked, first thing actually, he not born with knowledge. In the book 16, he put the 4 kinds of people, right? First kind is born with knowledge. Second kind is learning to know, okay? And the third kind is learn only in need. And the fourth kind is not learning even when you are in need. So he kind of think about himself is the second kind of people. It's not born with knowledge, it's learn.
To know.
Yeah.
Which is actually perhaps, more virtuous if you think about it, because you're just learning for knowledge's sake in that particular instance. Would anybody like to share their thoughts on 7.20? I thought this one was actually quite interesting myself, but it, as Jason had mentioned, it was covered earlier in 16. Or 6, wait a minute. 16.9. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's a book 6.
Later. That's
Yeah, it will be later. But in
later.
the chapter 1, he already talked about
Yeah.
the ancient teaching.
Does anybody have anything they would like to share?
I just had a quick question about the idea of love. I know we visited this in a week ago, and I remember that, Jason, you were explaining that it was a combination of the characters of mother and child in some way. Is that the same character that's showing up here?
Yes, the same how, and I think it's amount talk about. And my interpretation is more on the girl and the boy. Okay, one male, one female put together. Okay, and it depends on how you're going to think about it. But basics that means it's very broad. Meaning. So sometimes you call love like. The good.
So this
This
is
is also, go ahead. No, go ahead.
sorry, I know
Go ahead,
that
Maura.
a number of people have talked about modesty. I think Will was pointing to that. So this would reinforce that. But what does he really mean by born with knowledge? Because that seems like either a mystical idea.
Well, that gets back to what you were saying even before about the sage, to be quite honest, that he did not see himself as a sage, but the sage would be someone who would be born with knowledge. I mean, that would be my thought, is somebody that just knew the right thing to do and did things. Now, obviously, there are things in that's not always the case where we think of sages and Greek philosophy where you can become a sage. But my thought is, my understanding is that if you're born with knowledge, that that somehow you're born to some kind of perfection. That's my thought.
I think that I have to correct some of my translation. I think here he used the word 知. Okay, so this word is a verb. So like most of translators say, born with knowledge may not a proper way to translate, because you should be born knowing, born with the capability of knowing. Okay, so when Confucius said knowing, he doesn't mean I know that Tokyo is the capital of Japan, Paris is the capital of France. No, he's not talking about. He's talking about I know what to do. I know the right thing to do. So the knowledge it means knowing it. Okay, the word they use is born with knowing it in birth. Okay, that could be the proper translation.
Brian, followed by Quan. I'll be interested to hear.
This for me related to the very first verse we read today about still having joy in the midst of simplicity. And others had made the point, it's not necessarily the simplicity that gives joy. And then I think this, when I saw it, I thought, well, this completes that earlier thought. He gets the joy from learning the teachings of antiquity. So to me, these two go together.
That's true, and that is something that you can always pursue. That nobody can take that from you. Your ability to pursue knowledge. And that would make it internal as well, just as we've been talking about. Thank you for those comments, Brian. Excellent. Quan.
I was going to say exactly what Brian just said, but I would like to complete by saying that a certain culture will project the ideal state in the future, and other culture will project the ideal state in the past. But I think that projecting utopia, okay, let's use the word utopia. Okay? Projecting utopia in the past or in the future is not very important. What is important is the description of the ideal state of the government and of the human being. And because either you project that utopia in the past or in the future, what does it change? It doesn't change anything, because the only thing that you can, the only space time in which you can do something is the present. Okay. And in that present, you would strive for virtue, for character, for knowledge. Okay. And I agree that in this instance, knowledge is not information, is not skills. Knowledge here is character, is virtue. And some people are born more courageous, wiser, and it's simply a practical observation that we have.
So some people are born with the ability to apply their judgment in a wise way.
Well, we all know teenagers of 16 or 17 who act like people of 40 or 50, and we all know people of 40 or 50 who acts like teenagers of 17 or 18. Okay, and I'm not talking about fake ones. I'm talking about the true ones.
Sure.
Okay.
I still have a problem with the picture of the baby kind of lecturing everybody.
No, it's not to that extent. It's not to that extent. Okay, come on. Unless you accept the story of Buddha, who was born with all the souvenirs of his past lives, but that's another matter.
Yeah. Okay. I missed that that particular training, but I did read Siddhartha and have some experience with that concept. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to I don't know, I don't think this was on the loving what is old. Yeah, that's really all I had to comment on. I just wanted to sort of moderate my position on what Kwan's comments were.
Very good. Shall we move on to 721?
Yes.
721. The subjects on which the master did not talk were extraordinary things, feats of strength, disorder, and spiritual beings.
Okay, this is the Richardino, 721. The master did not speak of strange occurrences, feats of strength, political disruptions, and spirits.
I'm going to go ahead and read mine as well. It's very similar, but the master did not speak of unusual things, physical strength, insurgencies, and mysteries.
Okay, I'm going to do my version. It's only 7 characters, you know, and this one is very, very famous in the Chinese daily life. Okay, people all know, no matter you read Confucius or not, I think most of people know these 7 words. The master did not speak of abnormalities, military turmoil, nor mysteries. That's my translation. I have been thinking this one for a long, long time. So first, the words he used is yu, not, this words kind of means discussion. So I think that this one means that's the subject. So a lot of translation talk about the subject. So I think the Confucius refused to talk about these 4 subjects. And I think these 4 subjects is important because it makes Confucius, you know, this 4 subject actually is the popular subject. If you think through it, it's a popular subject. First, abnormalities. So who will talk about abnormalities, right? A lot of people talk about abnormalities, like that means unusual thing, earthquake, eclipse. So if you think about the Malaysian philosopher, okay, they try to predict the earthquake, predict the eclipse. So that's the popular subject for the ancient learned people. But Confucius said, no, that's not the subject I want to discuss. Second thing is Li. Okay, I translate as military things. So obvious, that could be a popular subject. But Confucius doesn't want to talk about this, right? Like Sun Tzu, they talk about art of war. Okay, that's a typical military subject. I believe that would be popular during the time, but Confucius doesn't want to talk about this. Turmoils, 乱, basically talking about political insurgents, revolt, this kind of thing. And I know most of the political philosophers, for example, Aristotle, okay, in his policies, will talk about this, right? The rebellions, okay. And number 4, 神, I translate as mysterious. So, of course, it's no surprise, like 道德经 will talk about some mysterious thing, especially like Pythagoras will talk about something mysterious. So these 4 subjects make Confucius' teaching very different from other schools. I think that's the reason Confucius said these 4 subjects he's not going to discuss, because that's probably popular, but he is not going to talk about this. And the next question will be why? Because Confucius focuses what as an individual you can do, right? So these 4 subjects, abnormality, earthquake, and the military, political rebellion, mystery thing, that's nothing you can change as an individual. So as a teacher, okay, moral teacher or moral political teacher, he want to focus on what you can do. So this 4 subjects, he doesn't want to discuss this one. And the reason he say that, because they probably popular, probably students want to know this. And he said, no, I'm not going to talk about this. Yeah.
It's interesting. From just my Stoic perspective, I automatically think of the fundamental rule, the idea of what you can control and what you don't control. And that Confucius seems to be focused here only on things that you can control yourself. And even the way you look at it, we've spoken about the idea of joy a little bit earlier, how it comes from the internally, that you're able to experience joy no matter what your circumstances may be. But it's just an interesting parallel to see these 4 areas. There's something that you have no control over. So anyway, would anybody like to make a comment with number 21? James.
Yeah, I think this shows those were great comments by Jason and Joseph. I think that this shows that Confucius was concerned about setting limits, and that one has to impose certain limits on oneself as a teacher, as a participant in society, these have to do. I think the idea that these things are all extraordinary, military, abnormality, turmoil, and mystery. It's not so much, I think, that they're out of reach. My feeling, I just want to describe my feeling, that it's not so much that they're all out of reach. It's the idea that one can not be concerned. One can choose just simply not to be concerned. One doesn't, if there's a war, one doesn't have to be a promoter of the war just because of where one lives, for example, or what the color of one's skin is or anything like that. When one can, if something happens that is unusual, I forget what the other translation was.
It's unusual.
Strange occurrences and feats of strength. Yeah, if something is unusual or particularly astounding, one can choose not to treat it seriously. It's just something that happens or something that happens. Now, maybe there's causes. If there's a causation, then one can be scientific about it and try to refer back to causes. So I don't agree 100. I don't agree with this 100% as a shibboleth. But on the other hand, we all have to set limits, and that is part of having a moral stance, is setting limits on what is important and what is not important.
Those are fantastic comments. Great comments, James. I appreciate those. Brian or Penny?
So I agree with everybody's comments and as to what this passage says and more in general. But I have a question in that it seems Confucius was reaching for something outside of his individual control when he was trying to be an advisor to governments, and he was trying to bring his philosophy to governments. It's been said many times that he failed, or he felt he failed at that. Isn't he acting? Isn't the whole thrust of his teaching pointing towards things that are outside or beyond his individual control?
I mean, it is a good question, because he is somewhat evangelizing to a certain degree. Maybe he's just offering tools to people in hopes that they'll adopt it as for the betterment of the state or the individual that's actually learning. But ultimately he's looking at it as it's not necessarily going to impact his own personal integrity or his own personal joy. That's the only explanation, but it's a good question. Maybe Quan can shed some light on it.
Well, that's a big question, but I think that most of the people, I agree with what most people said, that he wanted to distinguish what can be changed with rationality and the things that are more perceived as of the irrational domain. But there is maybe another smaller interpretation that I would like to propose. Let's not forget that one of the stuff that he didn't want to talk, and I'm speaking of the Robert Eno's translation, he was speaking of strange occurrences, feats of strength, political disruptions, and spirit. Okay, I want to focus on the political disruptions. Okay, let's not forget that he wanted to be the advisor to princes and kings.
Right.
I see it on a very down-to-earth level for once, and not metaphysical. Maybe I would change to another, that the master did not gossip of political disruptions, because at his time there were plenty of political disruptions. Okay, and he don't want to talk of those things in the coffees or in the living rooms of his guests and so on, because he wanted to talk about those things with the people having the power to change things, and not to talk wantonly, okay, with everyone about political disruptions. Okay, so on a very down-to-earth level, maybe he was giving a practical advice to his students to be careful in their talk when you're involved in politics, or when you have the ambitions to be advisor to princes and to kings. And let's not forget that in ancient times, strangers' occurrence or spirits or stuff like that were perceived as omens, as portents of political changes.
That's interesting. James.
Yeah, the one thing about this, there's some of these analects are actually in a different form than the others. Some of them are actually seem to be in the form of a fact. This is a fact about the master, rather than this is an anecdote about something the master said that can impart some wisdom to us. So this idea that the master would not speak of certain things, that he would actually set limits upon, impose limits upon himself, where it was, I think, is the major fact here. So not that the students that he was teaching that would apply to be junjis, and I assume to be junjis in state schools or for major families and so forth, that these would or possibly even ambassadors and things of that sort, that these would be that he would be telling them to don't talk about politics, don't talk about strange things, don't talk about, in other words, he's not necessarily setting these limits for everyone. And he's expressing a certain kind of like lack of interest for certain areas of knowledge. Like he's not interested in military affairs or political disruptions. But if you actually become an advisor to a king, that could be very important knowledge for someone. So in other words, he's basically saying there are limits to what, for at least for him, there are limits for what one can really understand or know things about. And I certainly agree with that in certain respects, such as abnormalities and the causes of things that are just abnormalities or things that are spirits. There are a lot of things we can't know about, things we don't know about. So, but on the other hand, and it is interesting that we do have certain scientists that could go back and say, well, there was causes for such and such a war. We had this war and there were causes for that war. And we can understand why the war happened and so on and so forth. So, so there is a science, there are sciences of some of these things, but that when you set limits on yourself, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's just so that you can concentrate in certain areas. And I think for Confucius, he's very clear. It's ritual and appropriate behavior and proper speech and grooming in the arts. So that's he has a certain structure to what he wants to teach and a structure of what he wants to avoid.
Thank you for that, James. Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, along with what James had just said, I think that a lot of these topics just lead to speculation. So like what caused the earthquake and blah, blah, blah,
Right.
or is the spirit meaning this or that or the other? So everybody can just talk endlessly about what they think might be the cause, where he wanted to focus on learning about, the antiquities, the kingdom of Zhou, which he thought was like the ideal time. And so just like, instead of spinning your wheels and everybody just saying, well, I think it's this, and I think it's this, he just didn't talk about that stuff.
And I can appreciate that. I mean, and you talk about, you have discussions about things that you absolutely are certain of, or somewhat certain of anyway, never absolutely certain, but Mark.
Thanks, Joseph. I'm looking at Slingerland's note on this one, and he notes that there's a subtle difference between, I want to pronounce these correctly, yu and yan. Yu, he says, is both apparently, which mean talking or speaking. But yu, he says, which is the word that is used here, is about discussing and responding, whereas yan is something that's much more straightforward. And maybe I don't know if this corresponds to our distinction between talk and discussion or dialogue versus lecture. So I'm just wondering if that's an important distinction here. And he also quotes a note from Chen Zi, who was a 12th century scholar, who makes the point that someone once asked if Confucius would not speak about these things, how come the spring and autumn annals are full of discussions about rebellions and abnormal things? And the reply was that the spring and autumn annals were a great standard for governing the world, which is relied upon for deterring rebellious subjects and educating people in a sense. But the Analects is more about a collection of teachings that offers a positive model of heaven. So I guess the suggestion is that there are different functions and perspectives in each of the works. So I'm just wondering if that resonates with anybody.
Yeah, let me respond to Mark. Thank you, Mark. You always give a very specific question. Yeah, okay. So first you talk about yu and yan. Okay, that's the two words. And I think I mentioned that in my translation. The very important, I think that's important. He said 子不语. Okay, he used the word 语. Unlike most of praise, I think all the praise we always say the master said, which is 约, okay, or sometimes say 言, okay, that means speak. 约 means said. 语 is the word more on the discussion, okay, so that's a dialect. So I think that made perfect on Mark's second question. In the spring and the autumn, it's full of the war, rebellion. Yes, Confucius is not discussing this one. He just write this one. I just have to kind of defend for Confucius. Okay, so but but here he specifically talk about use the word 语, and the use is a third person, right? Describe, just like James talk about. It describes the fact. Confucius doesn't discuss. Okay, these four subjects. I think that's my response to Mark. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any comments about number 21? That's a very good response.
Let me give some tips on that, on this 7 words. When I was young, and then we were like, I remember a book called 子不语. Okay, the master doesn't say. So that's a book full of funny, strange, crazy thing. Okay, violence, sex, everything. Okay. Just like I think they have a book in the 19th century or 18th century in England in English that's called Aristotle's Masterpiece. Okay, that's all full of strange thing. I think that's the similar situation.
Thanks for that, Jason.
What's that?
Thanks for that. That's very informative. Yeah.
Yeah.
Trash pop.
Go to Amazon to find the master doesn't say. See what you can find.
Trash at Amazon. Excellent.
Does anybody else have any comments they would like to add to verse 21? We've made some very, very good progress this evening. I think this is very informative, and I appreciate everybody's comments.
I'm just wondering whether, thanks, Joseph, if he doesn't speak of these in the sense of discussing them, that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't have a view on them.
Does anybody wish to reply to Mark? Or
yeah, I think he probably not in his teaching subject, right? So
well, that was my point precisely. It's not because he doesn't want, that he did not want to wantonly discuss those things, that he would not discuss those things with the people in power. And I still focus on political disruptions. And I think that the fact that someone mentioned that in the Chunchu, the spring and autumns, it's full of political disruption. And let's not forget that man had the ambition to restore the glory of the child. So
Yeah. Very good. Well, with that, if there are no other comments, then I'm going to go ahead and just tell everyone about some really exciting events we have upcoming this weekend. Jason, what do you have upcoming this weekend, actually?
This weekend we talk. This Saturday we talk about qi. Okay, that's still in the Song Dynasty near Confucius movement. So we will talk about Zhang Zai, who is using qi as a explanation of metaphysics, cosmology, and
Okay.
also go into the moral teaching. So kind of Moism, kind of thinker. Okay, so I think he's important, and the book I constantly follow is the Short History of the Chinese Philosophy. The author seems not put a lot of effort on him, so he only put like 2-3 pages. I would like to expand a little bit and kind of go through the qi concept, in the entire history.
Okay, I don't know if that's been posted yet on the 52 Living Ideas, but it is posted on the it is posted on Eurasian Philosophy's website.
Yes,
right?
I already
Okay.
posted, and I think, yeah.
We'll cross post it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Tomorrow we'll be covering it'll be Comprehensivist Wednesdays. We've done over 150 meetups on comprehensivism. And so basically you can come to discuss your favorites of those meetups. That should be interesting. Thursday will be the Gospel of John. We'll be covering verses 31 and 32. And we encourage everybody to read the Aquinas commentary on chapter 13, verses 31 and 32. Friday, we're actually launching a new series based on Ray Dalio's book, Principles. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with that book. It's a very, very popular book written by a very successful businessman talking about the principles that led him to persevere over some very, very difficult periods and principles to live by. And Sunday is a very, very exciting event, which is the third lecture in a series in launching Trivium University. So that's with Mark Stallman, and as well as a professor of the Great Books program at the University of Chicago, whose name is escaping me at the moment. But those are excellent lectures, as well as Faust on Sunday at 5 p.m. So we have a lot scheduled in the next in the next few days. So I know that hopefully I'll see most of you at some point in the next week. And to any of the individuals that I don't see before, then I will I hope to see you here next Tuesday. So great. It's always an honor to be here with everyone, and thank you everyone for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Good to be at the end of the meeting. I don't know what happened, but woke up again. Anyway, want to say hello.
Well, you know
Want to
what?
say hello to Mark also.
But my
I
goal.
just have to say that's a common practice to listen to Confucius.
Wait,
We did a very
well, you
good
know
job.
what? That's going to be my goal next week, is to keep you up the entire time. So I don't know. I'm going to have to I'm going to really have to work hard, make it entertaining. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So take a caffeine pill just in case.
That's So, oh, you have little faith there.
Well, we allow you to-
Because it's just.
we allow smoking is allowed in this meetup. So.
It's actually encouraged.
Thank you for that. Thank you. All right.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you for
Okay, good
joining
night.
us.
Bye.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
All right.
Joseph,
Yes.
where does the Mahabharata group meet? What is that?
I don't think there is one. It would be nice. So we were just pulling things from Mahabharata, but maybe that's something that we do cover at some point here at 52 Living Ideas. I don't know if there is a group though that's covering it on a regular basis. I mean, we cover the parts, we covered the Gita and we've covered stories of the Mahabharata, but I don't know. There's got to be a meetup group somewhere that's covering that, I would hope. Anyway,
We're projecting it into the future.
that's right. Exactly. Hopefully. I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed the Gita. It's one of my favorite meetups. It's allowed me to open up my mind in a lot of different areas, and including just reading this text or Christian or Christian text. So anyway, yeah, I'll talk to Shrikant and see what happens. So take
All right,
care.
Take care.
Have a great evening.
You too. Bye, James.
Bye.